About 145 million years ago, the Jurassic was coming to an end and the Cretaceous was beginning. The planet was still dominated by giant dinosaurs, but the new period would not just be a continuation. It would open the most diverse, complex, and unstable phase in the entire history of Mesozoic empires. The continents were no longer united as before. The fragmentation inherited from the past was advancing, isolating faunas, redrawing coastlines, and creating new shallow seas. This broken world did not weaken dominant life. On the contrary, it multiplied environments, divided lineages, and transformed the Cretaceous into a brutal laboratory of evolution on a planetary scale. The climate remained warm over much of the land, and vast regions resembled biological greenhouses. Without permanent polar ice caps like the modern ones, sea levels rose and flooded low-lying areas. The humidity and heat supported lush landscapes, where ancient forests coexisted with the first changes that would alter everything. Between 140 and 125 million years ago, a still discrete group of plants began to redefine the planet: flowering plants. In the beginning, they were small, scattered, and almost silent in the face of the dominant conifers. But their speed of reproduction, their variety, and their ability to reshape landscapes were initiating an irreversible ecological revolution. With the flowers, insects gained new routes, new foods, and new evolutionary alliances. The Cretaceous witnessed an explosion of interactions between plants and small arthropods. It was not just botanical beauty, it was ecological engineering. Each visit, each grain of pollen transported, each adaptation refined the machine that would sustain new food webs. The low vegetation became more nutritious, more distributed, and more diverse in many environments. This changed the behavior of herbivores, the movement of herds, and the way energy circulated through ecosystems. The Cretaceous did not just create new beings, it created new ways to occupy space and compete for every layer of the living world. Many herbivores thrived because they learned to explore this changing landscape. Where the plant structure once favored certain long-necked giants, now more varied niches were emerging. The result was an increasingly specialized fauna. The peak of the Cretaceous began not with a sudden explosion, but with a silent reorganization of the base of the ecosystem. In a more fragmented and biologically sophisticated world, reproduction and care also gained decisive importance. Broods, colonies, protection strategies, and rapid growth made a difference. Survival no longer depended solely on size. It depended on timing, local adaptation, and the ability to launch offspring in a planet saturated with predators and competitors. In some regions, the Cretaceous produced scenarios that seemed alien. In North Africa, enormous river systems and deltas supported a unique megafauna. Water concentrated life at extreme levels. Giant fish, immense crocodiliforms, pterosaurs, and large theropods competed in an environment that did not resemble the classic plains of the most famous terrestrial predators. Between about 112 and 95 million years ago, the Spinosaurus became one of the most extraordinary symbols of the Cretaceous. It was not the conventional land hunter. Its body, elongated snout, conical teeth, and close relationship with aquatic environments revealed another logic of power. It showed that the peak of the dinosaurs also passed through the rivers. The Spinosaurus did not need to dominate the savanna's terrain. Its strength lay in the interface between land and water. There, the predator exploited abundant resources, attacked in ambiguous terrain, and occupied a rare niche among the large theropods. The Cretaceous multiplied not only giant species, but also radically different styles of supremacy. Where biomass was concentrated, conflict was inevitable. Rich river environments attracted competitors from all sides. The dispute could involve fish, carcasses, hunting territories, and access to strategic banks. The Cretaceous was not a simple stage of winners and losers. It was an ecological arena where power meant extreme specialization. In the south, another lineage consolidated its dominance, the titanosaurs. Descendants of earlier sauropods, they thrived in different regions of Gondwana and became some of the largest herbivores of the period. Their presence reconfigured landscapes, opened trails, altered the soil, and supported entire chains of opportunists, parasites, and predators around their passage. These giants were not just walking masses. They were ecological engines. By consuming immense amounts of vegetation and moving over great distances, they reshaped entire areas. In the Cretaceous, the abundance of plant life and regional diversity allowed colossal lineages to coexist with medium and small forms, further enhancing the complexity of terrestrial life. In the skies, pterosaurs continued to be masters of the air. Some fished over coastal lagoons. Others traveled great distances, taking advantage of thermal currents and ocean winds. The airspace of the Cretaceous was not empty. It was a living domain, occupied by flying reptiles that expanded the visual and predatory reach of ecosystems. As the land changed, the seas of the Cretaceous became vast reservoirs of biological energy. The high sea level created shallow, warm platforms where plankton, mollusks, fish, and large predators thrived. The dominance of dinosaurs on land had an aquatic mirror, lush, dangerous oceans and continuous ecological expansion. The marine abundance influenced the entire planet. Nutrients circulated, trophic chains expanded, and new predators occupied the water column. The Cretaceous was a period when life seemed to explore every possible niche, from coastal mud to the skies, from flowering understories to the warm depths of inland and oceanic seas. Among the giants, smaller forms refined agility and predatory intelligence. Small feathered theropods, quick and alert, occupied the forest floor and edges of the woods. At this level, the Cretaceous was a world of sudden movements, precise ambushes, and constant pressure on eggs, chicks, insects, lizards, and small vulnerable prey. The true strength of the period was not just in the legendary predators. It was in the almost invisible machinery that kept everything running. Insects, seeds, leaves, decomposers, small vertebrates, and seasonal cycles made up the hidden architecture of power. When the base diversifies, everything else expands. That is what the Cretaceous did with brutal efficiency. Around 110 to 100 million years ago, the Cretaceous already exhibited an impressive environmental diversity. There was not a single dinosaur world. There were many. Tropical ecosystems, semi-arid regions, archipelagos, inland margins, dense forests, and coastal plains. Each environment shaped its own behaviors, bodies, diets, and ways of thriving. Some herbivorous lineages began to anticipate the prominence they would gain later on. Groups close to the hadrosaurs showed feeding efficiency, mobility, and the ability to explore large areas. The Cretaceous rewarded those who knew how to gather a lot, move well, and transform abundant vegetation into muscle, speed, and collective survival. In the southern hemisphere, predator lineages that would later become iconic were already occupying their territories. Gondwana was developing particular faunas, separated from those in the north by expanding oceans. This meant independent trajectories of gigantism, hunting, and adaptation. The Cretaceous was a continent divided into several continents, and each rupture created new empires. From above, the flying reptiles witnessed a planet in continuous reorganization. Rivers changed course, primitive mangroves spread, islands emerged, seas invaded and receded. Everything seemed fertile, mobile, and provisional. In the Cretaceous, abundance walked hand in hand with instability, and it is from this tension that the greatest biological worlds are born. In less than 50 million years, the planet had become more fragmented, more fertile, more specialized, and more diverse. Flowers redesigned landscapes, insects refined ecological connections, rivers fed extraordinary predators, the seas teemed with life, and the giants remained present. The Cretaceous was not just a peak of size, it was a peak of complexity. Around 100 million years ago, the New World was already set. The ecological pieces had been repositioned. The continents continued to drift apart. Life flourished in countless forms, and the dinosaurs were advancing to their most refined phase. The stage for the final empires was ready, and on it would emerge the most famous kings and the last lords of the earth. Between about 166 million years ago, the Cretaceous entered its most famous phase. Ecosystems were already mature, lineages had diversified, and the land became the stage for the final empires of the dinosaurs. It was no longer just expansion. It was the absolute peak of power, specialization, and diversity on a continental scale, as flowering plants advanced increasingly in many environments, altering the food supply and the structure of landscapes. This helped efficient herbivores to multiply in extraordinary numbers. Where biomass explodes, predators also grow. The late Cretaceous became the era in which abundance supported the largest terrestrial hunting and defense systems. Hadrosaurs became some of the great winners of this world. Adaptable, numerous, and efficient in processing vegetation, they spread across large territories. Their strength was not only in their bodies, but in their numbers. They were living columns of energy transformed into flesh, movement, and reproduction, potential food for the most powerful predators of the period. Contrary to the simplistic idea of slow and passive giants, many of these herbivores were sophisticated, mobile, and socially efficient. They exploited their environment with precision. In the late Cretaceous, evolutionary victory often belonged to those who could eat better, reproduce faster, and maintain cohesion in a world saturated with threats. In some regions, especially in the western part of North America, ceratopsians became another central image of herbivorous power. They were not just armored bodies with impressive horns. They were animals shaped for intimidation, defense, and display. In the late Cretaceous, the war for survival was also fought in the visual spectacle of the body itself. Numbers, solid skulls, and large collars served not only against predators. They could express age, vigor, dominance, and recognition among individuals of the same species. This reveals a biologically refined world, where sexual selection, collective defense, and predatory pressure intertwined. The sophistication of the Cretaceous was found in both violence and body communication. Meanwhile, in the southern hemisphere, the Titanosaurs continued to sustain colossal empires. Some reached extraordinary dimensions and dominated vast ecosystems in South America, Africa, Madagascar, and India. Their scale was so extreme that each movement seemed like a geological event. They were living continents in motion over continents in rupture. Around these giants, the abelisaurids took on the role of large predators in many southern lands. They were not copies of the northern hunters. They had their own anatomy, robust skulls, a distinct silhouette, and a unique predatory identity. The late Cretaceous did not produce a single model of king. It produced several, separated by oceans and evolutionary histories. Each continent wrote its own version of supremacy. In Gondwana, the abelisaurids represented a lineage hardened by difficult environments and particular faunas. In the north, another group was slowly growing to take the most famous throne of all. The peak of the Cretaceous was also the peak of biogeographical separation and independent regional empires. The Tyrannosaurs did not suddenly appear as perfect monsters. They were refined over millions of years. In the beginning, they were just one lineage among many. But between about 90 and 70 million years ago, certain species began to combine size, functional speed, sharp senses, and jaw strength into a nearly unparalleled predatory synthesis. Its superiority did not come solely from its size. It came from integration. Vision, smell, hearing, muscle mass, crushing dentition, and efficient locomotion formed an extraordinarily adapted hunting machine. In the late Cretaceous, the Tyrannosaurid became the ultimate expression of a terrestrial predator specialized in dominating huge herbivores and densely populated ecosystems. But the giant kings were not alone. In the shadows of the underbrush, the dromaeosaurs maintained another form of predatory excellence. Smaller, agile, feathered, and precise, they explored niches that the colossi could not reach. Where the tyrant broke, the dromaeosaur penetrated. Where the great king imposed weight, the small hunter triumphed through control of detail. This coexistence shows how sophisticated the late Cretaceous was. It wasn't enough to have a super predator at the top. There were entire strata of prey at different scales. Small theropods, medium pursuers, and giant crushers made up a living pyramid. Diversity did not diminish in the presence of a king. It reorganized around him. In the sky, pterosaurs reached astonishing forms. Some late Asdarchids had proportions that challenge our modern imagination. They were not just coastal flyers. They could navigate through interior environments, walk on the ground, and dominate the horizon like living sentinels. The late Cretaceous took reptilian flight to its most unsettling and grand extreme. The seas, in turn, became kingdoms of gigantic predators. Between about 90 and 66 million years ago, the mosasaurs rose as lords of the waters, replacing ancient forms and imposing a new model of marine hunting. The Cretaceous did not concentrate its monsters only on land. It distributed colossal size and violence throughout the planet. The dominance of the seas depended on the same logic that governed the land: high productivity, vast food chains, and brutal specialization. When food is abundant and the environment allows for expansion, evolution responds with excess. That is why the late Cretaceous seems so exaggerated. It was, literally, an era of ecosystems pushed to the limit. In some regions, the sea divided continents and shaped the very evolution of the land. The interior of North America, for example, was separated by a large inland sea, generating isolated faunas and distinct pressures on both sides. The result was a mosaic of local kingdoms, where geography fueled diversity and difference. Between about 72 and 68 million years ago, some regions reached an extraordinary biological richness. Herds of hadrosaurs, groups of ceratopsians, small omnivores, agile predators, and superpredators coexisted in a tense balance. Rarely has the Earth known such a density of large vertebrates coexisting in such energetically active ecosystems. This abundance depended on intense reproduction. Nesting colonies, accelerated growth, and collective strategies helped maintain populations at impressive numbers. The late Cretaceous was a world where being born mattered almost as much as surviving. Each generation had to traverse a hell of predators, climate, local scarcity, and territorial disputes. So, around 68 to 66 million years ago, the image that would become synonymous with the end of the age of dinosaurs emerged: fully developed large tyrannosaurids, among them the Tyrannosaurus rex. It does not summarize the entire Cretaceous, but synthesizes its late apogee: overwhelming force, monumental scale, and a presence sufficient to reorganize fear around it. The peak of the king was not just the attack. It was the ability to impose constant ecological pressure. Wherever he roamed, everything reacted: herd routes, vigilance, nest choice, carcass movement, opportunistic behavior. In the late Cretaceous, the top of the chain was not an abstract position. It was a physical presence that shaped the living world. Even so, the small hunters did not disappear under the shadow of the tyrant. The dromaeosaurs persisted, refining speed, precision, and adaptation to specific niches. This is what makes the Cretaceous so fascinating. It combined absolute gigantism with microecological subtleties. The large and the small did not cancel each other out. They supported each other within the same system. The final empires were complete. In the south, abelisaurids and titanosaurs. In the north, ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and tyrannosaurs. In the skies, giant pterosaurs. In the seas, formidable predators. Rarely had terrestrial and marine life achieved such a variety of dominant forms at the same time. It seemed like the definitive triumph of the Mesozoic era. And just when everything seemed consolidated, the system was approaching its most fragile point. The greater the complexity, the greater the dependence on stability. Long chains, large bodies, and superproductive ecosystems function magnificently in balance. But they become vulnerable when that balance is disrupted. The late Cretaceous shone at the edge of its own exposure. Around 67 to 66 million years ago, the Earth still belonged to the kings. The giants ate, hunted, flew, migrated, and reproduced as if their reign were eternal. The final empires seemed invincible, but the history of life does not respect crowns. And the same world that took millions of years to reach this peak was an instant away from its absolute collapse. About 68 to 66 million years ago, the age of the dinosaurs seemed complete. On land, in the skies, and in the seas, the great empires were still functioning. There were established kings, immense herds, sophisticated food chains, and a diversity accumulated over tens of millions of years. Nothing, at first glance, suggested that the end was so near. In the north, tyrannosaurids like the Tyrannosaurus rex embodied the late peak of terrestrial predation. They were the ultimate expression of a long evolutionary refinement. Strength, senses, scale, and ecological presence converged in an animal capable of dominating entire landscapes. It seemed impossible to imagine that such creatures could disappear so completely. Herbivores also reached their peak. Ceratopsians and hadrosaurs supported enormous populations, reproduced en masse, and organized the energy base of the Great Plains. Everything depended on them. When an era relies on abundant giants, any disruption in plant production or food cycles reverberates like a silent explosion throughout the system. In the southern hemisphere, titanosaurs and abelisaurids still maintained their own kingdoms. The separated continents had produced distinct empires, each with its dominant fauna and strategies. This makes the outcome even more impressive. The final cataclysm did not destroy just one ecosystem or one region. It affected the entire planetary fabric. The seas remained prodigious. Mosasaurs dominated the waters, ammonites still drew vibrant spirals in the oceans, and giant pterosaurs outlined a horizon along coastal and inland routes. The biosphere seemed packed with potential, but such productive systems depend on a delicate balance between light, temperature, photosynthesis, and continuous energy circulation. In the last times of the Cretaceous, the Earth was no longer completely stable. Large volcanic episodes, such as the eruptions that would form the Deccan Traps, altered regional atmospheres and released gases on a colossal scale. Alone, they might not have destroyed the world of the dinosaurs, but they remind us that the planet was already living under deep tensions before the decisive blow. The end of great eras is rarely announced clearly. There are no cosmic trumpets, only systems that continue to operate while accumulating vulnerabilities. And the more grand a dominion, the more dramatic its fall will be when the foundation crumbles. The majesty of the late Cretaceous hid precisely this, an extreme dependence on continuous ecological stability. So 66 million years ago, a celestial body about 10 kilometers wide approached the Earth. It was coming too fast for negotiation, too large to be absorbed, and too precise to spare the dominant world. In a few moments, all the biological engineering of the Cretaceous would be tested by a force that had nothing to do with gradual natural selection. The impact occurred in the region of the current Gulf of Mexico. The energy release surpassed on a scale everything that terrestrial empires had ever faced. It was not just a collision. It was the instantaneous transformation of kinetic energy into global destruction. In a geological second, the Age of Kings entered its terminal phase. The crust was violently pierced, rocks were vaporized, the sea receded and returned like a liquid wall. Gigantic tsunamis crossed ocean basins. Near the impact point, the devastation was absolute. But the worst was yet to come, because the blow would not end there. It would be redistributed throughout the planet's atmosphere. Debris launched into the air fell back on a global scale. The sky became a source of heat. The re-entry of the ejected material would have heated vast areas of the surface, causing fires, local collapses, and panic in entire ecosystems. The planet was hit not only at the point of impact, but by a thermal cascade distributed around the globe. Fires devastated habitats, consumed vegetation, and filled the air with soot. The biosphere, built on abundant plant production, was beginning to lose its foundation. For the large herbivores, this meant imminent hunger. For the large predators, it meant the gradual collapse of the very food base. The apocalypse of the kings was not just an explosion. It was systemic disintegration. The dust and aerosols released into the atmosphere drastically reduced the entry of sunlight. Photosynthesis plummeted, and when the light falls, the entire food chain begins to falter. What was once abundance turns into scarcity. What once seemed like ecological stability reveals itself to be a colossal architecture supported by a simple pillar, energy from the sun. The large herbivores were hit early. Animals that required a huge volume of daily food could not withstand long periods of plant productivity breakdown. Hunger does not need to be instantaneous to be fatal. It just has to last long enough. Before long, the large herds ceased to be a symbol of abundance and became victims of their own scale. The great predators fell soon after. Without healthy herbivores, without a continuous flow of carcasses, and without functioning ecosystems, even the kings were left without a kingdom. The force that dominated entire plains was not capable of creating food from nothing. The tyrant could bite bones, but could not prevent the foundation of his world from being torn away. The collapse did not choose a hemisphere. In the south, titanosaurs and abelisaurids also faced the breakdown of food chains and seasonal cycles. This is what makes this event so definitive. Lineages that had thrived separately for millions of years on distinct continents encountered the same limit at the same time: the failure of the productive biosphere. The giant pterosaurs, dependent on still functional ecosystems, also disappeared. Their aerial dominance, built over eras, ended when food sources and productive landscapes were disrupted. It was not enough to be able to fly. There had to be a world down below supporting fish, carcasses, small animals, and living margins. That world was coming to an end. The oceans also suffered. When the microscopic base of marine chains is affected, the collapse rises silently through the water. Ammonites disappeared. Large marine predators lost their support. The extinction at the end of the Cretaceous was not only terrestrial. It was a drastic remodeling of the seas, the coasts, and the very chemistry of ocean life. Even so, not everything died. Small lineages with flexible diets, quick cycles, and the ability to take advantage of refuges had a better chance of surviving the hell. Smaller size, dietary opportunism, underground shelter, or consumption of seeds and organic matter made a difference. In the apocalypse, survival rewarded biological discretion, not majesty. Among the survivors were some birds, descendants of theropod dinosaurs. This means that dinosaurs did not completely disappear. The lineage continued, but in a reduced, lightweight, and adaptable form. The giants fell. The legacy remained in small bodies, capable of traversing the devastated world that the colossi could not endure. After the darkness, the biosphere slowly began to recover, but it was no longer the same planet. The giants that shaped trails, clouds of dust, and horizons had departed. The new world would be built by smaller, more flexible survivors, less dependent on colossal ecosystems. The reign of the kings was ending so that another story could begin. Thus ended the long experience of non-avian dinosaurs as the rulers of the planet, not due to weakness, nor moral or biological decay, but because a sudden catastrophe struck the exact point of dependence of the system. They were extraordinary until the end, and precisely because they had brought life to its peak, the fall became even more monumental. The great trajectory was complete. In the Triassic, the lineage was forged in a harsh and unstable world. In the Jurassic, the Titans rose and expanded their sovereignty. In the Cretaceous, diversity reached its peak, the final empires rose, and life seemed to touch its Mesozoic apex. Then came the blow that closed the arc of the kings. What ended 66 million years ago was not just a geological period. It was the largest span of animal dominance that the Earth has ever witnessed. For over 160 million years, dinosaurs thrived, grew, diversified, and ruled. Their fall was absolute on the scale of giants. But their signature has never disappeared. It still crosses the sky on living wings. If you enjoy epic, dense, and really well-crafted documentaries about prehistory, follow us. Because the story of dinosaurs was not just a collection of monsters lost in time. It was a colossal saga of survival, rise, glory, and apocalypse. And understanding that end is also understanding why life, even when devastated, never stopped starting over.